The delicate hospital bracelet slipped from Amelia Bennett's wrist as she frantically gathered her belongings at Riverstone Café. It had been a morning of catastrophes: her 5-year-old son Michael's asthma attack at 4 a.m., the emergency room visit that depleted her already dwindling savings, and now she was late for her shift at the local diner. Single motherhood had never felt more overwhelming than in this moment, as rain pounded against the cafe windows and her phone buzzed with texts from her impatient manager. "Ma'am, you dropped something," called a barista, but Amelia was already pushing through the door, her rain-soaked coat clinging to her shoulders as she dashed toward the bus stop. The discarded hospital bracelet lay on the polished wooden floor, its white plastic band displaying Bennett, Michael J., and the date from earlier that morning. A young server picked it up, turning it over in her hands before placing it in the lost and found box behind the counter. Later that afternoon, Thomas Harrington, CEO of Harrington Health Systems, walked into Riverstone Café seeking refuge from both the persistent downpour and the crushing pressure of running his family's healthcare empire. At 42, Thomas had everything money could buy, except peace of mind. The upcoming board meeting weighed heavily on him. His father's legacy was at stake as financial pressures mounted to cut charitable programs at their hospitals. "The usual, Mr. Harrington?" asked Kate, the manager who had come to recognize the businessman during his weekly visits. Thomas nodded, loosening his tie as he settled into his favorite corner table. The cafe provided a rare escape from the sterile boardrooms and the hollow echo of his penthouse apartment. As Kate brought over his black coffee and blueberry scone, she noticed his distracted expression. "Rough day?" she inquired, setting down his order. "Just business decisions I'm not proud of," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "Sometimes what's good for the bottom line isn't good for the soul." Kate smiled sympathetically. "Before I forget, we found a hospital bracelet this morning. It's hospital policy to return them, patient privacy and all that. Since you run the hospital network, maybe you could make sure it gets back to the right department?" Before Thomas could protest that this wasn't exactly the CEO's job, Kate retrieved the plastic band from the lost and found. Thomas took it with a polite nod, glancing down at the name printed in bold black letters. His coffee cup froze midway to his lips, and the color drained from his face. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrington?" Kate asked, alarmed by his sudden pallor. "Yes." "Fine," he managed, his voice barely audible over the cafe's ambient noise. "Thank you for this." As Kate walked away, Thomas stared at the name as though it were a ghost materialized before him. Bennett. Michael J. Bennett. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Sandra, I need you to find information on a patient from this morning. Michael Bennett, likely a child. It's urgent." 20 minutes later, Thomas stood outside in the rain, coffee forgotten, reading an email from his assistant. 5-year-old Michael Bennett had been admitted at 4:23 a.m. with a severe asthma attack. Insurance, minimal coverage. Address, West Side Apartments, the subsidized housing complex on the other side of town. Guardian, Amelia Bennett, single mother, 2 jobs. Thomas leaned against the brick wall of the cafe, memories flooding back like the rainwater rushing down the gutters. Amelia Bennett. It couldn't be the same Amelia, his Amelia from 15 years ago, the woman he'd loved during his medical residency, before his father's heart attack had pulled him away from medicine and into the executive suite. The woman who had disappeared from his life with only a brief note saying she needed to find her own path. Across town, Amelia wiped down tables at Hank's diner, her tired eyes repeatedly checking the clock. Her shift ended in 20 minutes, just in time to pick up Michael from her neighbor who watched him after school. Her hand went to her wrist, a habit formed over the past 12 hours, searching for the hospital bracelet she'd taken from Michael when he complained it was itchy. Her stomach knotted when she realized it was gone. That small plastic band had cost $75 she couldn't afford, added to her already overwhelming hospital bill. "Amelia, there's a gentleman asking for you," said Hank, the diner's owner, his gruff voice tinged with unusual respect. "Says it's important." She looked up, tucking a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear, and froze. Standing at the entrance, his expensive coat speckled with raindrops and his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race, was Thomas Harrington, the man she had walked away from 15 years ago, the man whose child she had carried away with her. "Thomas," she whispered, the cleaning cloth falling from her fingers. "Hello, Amelia," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. In his hand, he held Michael's hospital bracelet. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." Hank looked between them, sensing the electric tension. "Take your break, Amelia. Hell, take the rest of your shift. Whatever this is seems important." Thomas stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face. "Is he mine, Amelia? Is Michael my son?" The diner seemed to fade around them as Amelia's world narrowed to this moment she had both dreaded and secretly longed for. 15 years of secrets, struggles, and solitary parenting converged in the space between them. She had her reasons for leaving, good ones, but standing before Thomas now, those reasons seemed to evaporate like the steam rising from the diner's coffee pots. "Yes," she finally said, her voice stronger than she expected. "He's yours. But before you say anything else, you need to know why I left, why I kept him from you, and it has everything to do with your father and the empire you're now running." Thomas's face hardened, confusion and anger battling with the shock of discovery. Outside, the rain intensified, beating against the windows like the questions pounding in his mind. A son. He had a son he'd never known. A son who had been in his hospital that very morning, struggling to breathe while Thomas had been in a meeting discussing cuts to pediatric care. "I'm listening," he said, pulling out a chair at the nearest table. "And this time, Amelia, I'm not letting you disappear again." Amelia glanced nervously at the other customers in the diner, then back at Thomas's intense gaze. "Not here," she said quietly. "My shift ends in 15 minutes. I need to pick up Michael from my neighbor's apartment." Thomas nodded, his jaw tight with restraint. "I'll wait." Those 15 minutes stretched like years. Amelia moved mechanically through her closing duties, hyper-aware of Thomas watching her from the corner booth. He'd barely changed, a few distinguished lines around his eyes, a hint of silver at his temples, but still the same commanding presence that had drawn her to him during those long hospital nights years ago. When she finally hung up her apron, Thomas stood. "My car's outside. I take the bus," she replied, chin lifting slightly. "Amelia," he said, his voice softening for the first time, "it's pouring rain. Please let me drive you." The luxury sedan felt like another world compared to her daily bus commute. Amelia sat rigidly, directing him toward the shabby apartment complex where she'd raised their son. Neither spoke until they were parked outside the building. "Wait here," she instructed, disappearing inside. Minutes later, she emerged with Michael, a small boy with unruly dark hair and striking blue eyes. Thomas's eyes. The boy wore a dinosaur backpack nearly as big as he was and clutched an inhaler in his small hand. Thomas felt his heart constrict at the sight. "Michael, this is an old friend of Mommy's," Amelia said carefully. "Mr. Harrington." "Hello," the boy said shyly, extending his hand with surprising formality. Thomas shook it gently, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. This child, his son, had his mother's nose and chin, but everything else, from the curve of his eyebrows to the shape of his hands, was unmistakably Harrington. Their apartment was small, but meticulously clean. Framed drawings covered the refrigerator, and a shelf sagged under the weight of library books. It was a home built with love, but constrained by financial reality. "Michael, honey, why don't you play in your room for a bit? Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Harrington." Once Michael was out of earshot, Amelia turned to Thomas, arms crossed protectively across her chest. "Your father threatened me," she began without preamble, "when he found out I was pregnant." Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "The great Philip Harrington," Amelia continued bitterly, "came to me while you were at that conference in Boston. He made it very clear that a penniless nurse wasn't suitable for his son, the Harrington heir. He offered me money to disappear." "And you took it?" Thomas asked, his voice hardening. "No," she shot back, eyes flashing. "I refused it. That's when he threatened to ruin my career. He said no hospital in the country would hire me once he was through. Then he threatened something worse. He said he'd make sure you'd never practice medicine again." Thomas sank into a kitchen chair, running his hands through his hair. "That sounds exactly like him." "You were brilliant, Thomas. The most gifted surgeon in your program. I couldn't be the reason you lost everything you'd worked for." "So you disappeared," he said flatly. "Without even telling me about our child. I left a letter with your father to give you," she said quietly. "I'm guessing you never received it." Thomas's laugh was hollow. A note saying you needed to find your own path. That's all I got. Amelia's eyes widened. That's not what I wrote. I wrote that I was pregnant, that your father had threatened us both, and that I was going to my cousin's in Arizona until I figured things out. I asked you to contact me there if you still wanted me in your life. A heavy silence fell between them as the implications of her words sank in. He intercepted it, Thomas finally said, and then my father had his heart attack 2 weeks later. I gave up my residency to step in at the company. I thought you'd left because I wasn't good enough, because a doctor without connections wasn't what you wanted. I left to protect you, Amelia whispered. And then, when I heard you'd taken over the company, I figured you'd made your choice. I made the only choice I could with the information I had, Thomas countered. Why didn't you come back once Michael was born? Why keep him from me all these years? Amelia looked away. By then, you were becoming the man your father wanted. I saw your engagement announcement to Victoria Reynolds in the paper. The perfect merger of two healthcare dynasties, according to the article. An engagement that fell apart 3 months later, Thomas said. She realized I couldn't love her because I was still in love with someone else. Their eyes met across the small kitchen, 15 years of misunderstanding suspended between them. Mommy, Michael's voice broke the tension as he padded into the kitchen. I'm hungry. Of course, sweetie. I'll make dinner soon, Amelia said, quickly wiping her eyes. I have dinosaur chicken nuggets, Michael informed Thomas seriously. Do you like dinosaur chicken nuggets, Mr. Harrington? A smile cracked through Thomas's stern expression. I've never had them, but they sound excellent. You can stay for dinner, Michael decided, with the supreme confidence of a 5-year-old. I'll show you my rock collection. Over dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and frozen peas, Thomas learned about his son. Michael loved paleontology, hated carrots, and had recently lost his first tooth. He struggled with asthma, but never complained. He was top of his kindergarten class in reading, and had taught himself basic addition using rocks from the playground. As Michael chatted excitedly about his upcoming school field trip to the Natural History Museum, Thomas noticed Amelia's worried expression. Later, when Michael was busy showing Thomas his prized rock specimens, she explained in hushed tones, The field trip costs $30. With the hospital bills from last night, I just can't swing it this month. I haven't told him yet. Thomas reached for his wallet, but Amelia stopped him with a firm hand on his arm. Don't. I'm not telling you this for money. I'm explaining my reality, our reality. This is why I've been working 2 jobs. This is why I couldn't just come back into your life with a baby. Your world and mine became completely different. Later, after Michael had fallen asleep, Thomas and Amelia sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. I want to be part of his life, Thomas said firmly. I've missed 5 years already. I won't miss any more. It's not that simple, Amelia sighed. You can't just walk in and claim fatherhood. He doesn't even know about you. Then we'll tell him, together, gradually. However you think best. Amelia studied him over the rim of her mug. And what happens when your father finds out? He's still chairman of the board, isn't he? Thomas's expression darkened. My father is dying, Amelia. Pancreatic cancer. He has months at most. He doesn't get a say in this anymore. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Before Amelia could respond, her phone rang, the hospital. Michael's test results had come back. They wanted him back in the emergency room immediately. Amelia's face went pale as she hung up the phone. They found something concerning in Michael's blood work. We need to go back to the hospital right now. Thomas was already on his feet. My car's outside. We'll get there in 10 minutes. I need to wake him, Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly. She disappeared into Michael's bedroom, returning moments later with the drowsy child bundled in a blue blanket, his favorite stuffed triceratops clutched against his chest. Where are we going, Mommy? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Back to the hospital, sweetheart. The doctors want to check something. She kept her voice steady, though Thomas could see the fear in her eyes. In the car, Michael quickly fell back asleep in his mother's arms. Thomas glanced over at them at a stoplight, his son and the woman he'd never stopped loving, both looking vulnerable in the harsh glow of the streetlights. What exactly did they say? He asked quietly. His white blood cell count is abnormal, Amelia whispered. They want to run more tests. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter. As CEO of the hospital system, he could ensure Michael received the best care possible, but as a former medical student, He knew enough to be terrified by what abnormal blood counts might indicate. The emergency room staff recognized Thomas immediately, their surprised expressions revealing the oddity of seeing their CEO arrive with a patient. Amelia noticed how the atmosphere changed. Suddenly there was no waiting, no forms to fill out, no questions about insurance coverage. Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's top pediatric specialist, arrived within minutes of their check-in. "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged with professional courtesy, before turning her attention to Amelia and Michael. "Mrs. Bennett, we'd like to run some additional tests." Michael's blood work showed some irregularities that could be explained by his asthma and the medications he's on, but we want to be thorough. "It's Miss Bennett," Amelia corrected automatically. "And this is—" She hesitated, looking at Thomas. "I'm Michael's father," Thomas stated firmly, surprising both Amelia and the doctor. "I want to be fully informed about all tests and procedures." Dr. Williams nodded, though her curious glance between them revealed her confusion. "Of course. If you'll follow me, we can get started right away." The next 2 hours were a blur of blood draws, examinations, and anxious waiting. Michael, now fully awake, handled each procedure with a bravery that made Thomas's chest ache with pride. During a brief moment alone while Amelia accompanied Michael to a scan, Thomas made a call to the hospital's billing department, quietly arranging for all charges to be directed to him personally. "You didn't need to do that," Amelia said when she returned and he told her what he'd done. "I can figure something out. He's my son," Thomas replied simply, "and I have 15 years of support to make up for." Amelia sank into the chair beside him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I never wanted your money, Thomas. I just wanted you. And I would have chosen you and Michael if I'd known," he said softly. "Every day for the past 15 years, I've wondered where you were, what you were doing. I dated, even got engaged, but I could never commit because no one was you." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Your father showed me articles about your rising career, your engagement. He sent me clippings for years, as if to prove I'd made the right choice in leaving." "He manipulated both of us," Thomas said, his voice tight with anger. "And tomorrow I'm going to confront him about it. Thomas, no, he's dying. What good would it do? It's not about revenge. It's about truth, about finally standing up to him." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Amelia's heart ache. "All these years I've been trying to live up to his expectations, running his company his way. Next week the board is voting on major cuts to charitable care, including the pediatric asthma program that treated Michael last night. My father's pushing for it from his hospice bed." "And what do you want?" Amelia asked. Before Thomas could answer, Dr. Williams returned with a tablet in hand and a serious expression on her face. Michael was being entertained by a nurse in the children's area, out of earshot. "I have preliminary results," she said, sitting across from them. "Michael's white blood cell count is significantly elevated. Combined with his recurring respiratory issues, I'm concerned we might be looking at something more than just asthma." "Such as?" Thomas asked, medical training kicking in as he reached for Amelia's hand. "Possibly an autoimmune condition or—" Dr. Williams hesitated. "Please, just tell us," Amelia pleaded. "We need to rule out leukemia," the doctor said gently. "It's still very preliminary, and there are many other explanations, but I've scheduled a bone marrow aspiration for tomorrow morning. We'll know more then." The word hit them like a physical blow. Amelia's hand tightened around Thomas's, her nails digging into his palm. "What's the protocol if it is—" Thomas couldn't finish the sentence. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Dr. Williams advised. "The 5-year survival rate for childhood leukemia is over 90% with proper treatment, and Michael will have the best care possible." After the doctor left, Amelia collapsed against Thomas's shoulder, silent tears soaking into his expensive shirt. He held her tightly, his own eyes burning. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "Not when you've just found him." Thomas pulled back slightly, looking directly into her eyes. "Listen to me, Amelia. If it is leukemia, and that's still a big if, we will fight it together. I have resources, connections to the best specialists in the country, and more importantly, Michael has us, both of us." As they sat there in the sterile hospital corridor, reunited under the most painful circumstances, Thomas made a silent vow. No matter what happened with Michael's health, no matter what confrontation awaited with his father, he would not lose this family again. The empire his father had built, the legacy he'd been groomed to protect. None of it mattered compared to the little boy with dinosaur pajamas and the woman he'd never stopped loving. Morning arrived with the harsh fluorescent reality of hospital lighting. Michael sat cross-legged on his bed, animatedly explaining the difference between a Triceratops and a Styracosaurus to Thomas, seemingly unfazed by the impending procedure. Amelia stood by the window, her third cup of coffee clutched in trembling hands, dark circles shadowing her eyes after a sleepless night. "Mr. Dinosaur Expert," called a nurse from the doorway, "we're ready for you now." Michael's bravado faltered momentarily. "Will it hurt?" "They'll give you medicine so you won't feel much," Amelia explained, setting down her coffee to smooth his wild bedhead. "And I'll be right there holding your hand." "Can Mr. Harrington come too?" Michael asked, surprising both adults. Thomas felt his throat tighten. "If that's okay with your mom, I'd be honored." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. The bone marrow aspiration was quick, but brutal. Michael whimpered despite the local anesthetic, his small hand gripping Thomas's with surprising strength. Watching his son endure pain while being powerless to stop it was a new kind of torture for Thomas. Beside him, Amelia murmured soothing words, her face a mask of composure that Thomas suspected had been perfected through years of solo parenting crises. "All done, brave boy," the doctor announced, placing a bandage over the needle site on Michael's hip. "You did better than most adults. Can I have ice cream now?" Michael asked, his voice small but determined. "You said I could have ice cream after." Thomas laughed, relief flooding through him. "I'll get you any flavor you want. 2 scoops. 3, Michael bargained, a mischievous glint returning to his eyes. "Michael," Amelia warned, though her lips twitched with amusement. "Tell you what," Thomas countered. 2 scoops now, and if you're feeling up to it later, we'll go for another round after dinner." Michael considered this with grave seriousness before extending his hand. "Deal." As Thomas shook on their agreement, he caught Amelia watching them with an expression that made his heart constrict. Wonder mixed with profound sadness, as if witnessing something precious that had been lost to both of them for too long. While Michael rested after his procedure, Thomas stepped into the hallway to make a call. His assistant answered on the first ring. "Sandra, I need you to reschedule everything for the next few days. Family emergency." "Sir?" His assistant sounded bewildered. In 15 years, Thomas Harrington had never missed a day for personal reasons. "Also, I want the complete financial records for all our pediatric programs for the last 10 years. And contact legal. I need to understand exactly what authority the board has over funding decisions. Does this have anything to do with tomorrow's vote on the charitable care cuts?" "Everything," Thomas confirmed. "And Sandra, I'm going to need you to arrange a visit to my father this afternoon." When he returned to the room, Amelia was sitting beside Michael's bed, reading him a book about dinosaurs. The scene was so perfect, so achingly like the family life he'd never known he wanted, that Thomas had to pause in the doorway. "I need to see my father," he said quietly, when Amelia noticed him. "There are things that need to be said before it's too late." "I understand," she nodded. "We'll be fine here." "Actually," Thomas hesitated, "I'd like you to come with me. Both of you. If Michael's feeling up to it after his ice cream." Amelia's expression hardened. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," Thomas insisted. "I need to introduce him to his grandson, and I need you there when I confront him about what he did to us. And if Michael's tests come back positive, if it is leukemia, are you going to parade your sick child in front of your dying father as some kind of punishment?" Thomas moved closer, taking her hands in his. "This isn't about revenge, Amelia. It's about truth. About healing old wounds before new ones have to be faced. About claiming my family before it's too late for any of us." After a moment's hesitation, Amelia nodded. "But at the first sign, Michael's uncomfortable or tired, we leave. He comes first." "Always," Thomas agreed. 3 hours later, their unlikely family of 3 stood outside Philip Harrington's private room at Lakeside Hospice Center. Michael, energized by the promised ice cream and the adventure of riding in Thomas's fancy car, bounced on his toes, unaware of the tension radiating from the adults. "Remember what we practiced?" Amelia asked, kneeling to straighten Michael's collar. He nodded solemnly. "This is my grandpa who's been very sick, so I have to be gentle, and if I get tired or scared, I just have to squeeze your hand and we can leave." "Perfect," she praised, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Thomas watched their interaction with a mixture of admiration and regret for all the moments like this he'd missed. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Philip Harrington had once been an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same piercing blue eyes he'd passed down to his son and grandson. Now he was a shadow, his once powerful frame withered by disease. Medical equipment surrounded his bed, monitoring the failing systems of his body. "Thomas?" The old man's voice was raspy, but still carried the authoritative tone that had dominated Thomas's life. "I didn't expect you until the board meeting tomorrow." "Change of plans," Thomas replied, stepping aside to reveal Amelia and Michael. For a moment, confusion clouded Philip's gaunt face. Then recognition dawned, followed by something Thomas had rarely seen in his father's expression: fear. "What is this?" Philip demanded, his eyes fixed on Amelia. "This is Amelia Bennett," Thomas stated evenly. "The woman I loved 15 years ago. The woman you threatened and drove away. And this," he placed a protective hand on Michael's shoulder, "is Michael Bennett, my son, your grandson." The machines monitoring Philip's heart rate beeped faster. "You had no right—" "No, father. You had no right," Thomas interrupted, his voice cold. "No right to intercept Amelia's letter telling me she was pregnant. No right to send her clippings about my engagement as if I'd moved on. No right to rob me of 5 years with my son." Michael, sensing the tension, pressed closer to his mother's side. Amelia squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "I did what was necessary," Philip rasped. "You were meant for greater things than throwing away your future on a nurse with no connections, no family background." "Greater things," Thomas laughed bitterly. "Like cutting pediatric programs to improve quarterly profits? Like becoming exactly the kind of ruthless businessman you wanted me to be? The company was never what I wanted," Thomas cut him off. "Medicine was my passion. Helping people was my calling. You took that from me when you manipulated me into taking over after your heart attack, just like you took Amelia and Michael from me." Philip's gaze shifted to Michael, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the old man's face. "He has your eyes," Philip said quietly, "and your mother's chin." Thomas felt Amelia stiffen beside him, surprised by this moment of apparent softening. "Michael," Thomas said gently, "would you like to say hello to your grandfather?" Michael stepped forward cautiously. "Hello, sir. I'm sorry you're sick. I was at the hospital yesterday too, but I got ice cream after." A ghost of a smile touched Philip's lips. "Did you now? What flavor?" "Chocolate and mint," Michael answered, gaining confidence. "And Mr. Harrington, my dad, said I could have more later if I was good." The word dad hung in the air between them all. It was the first time Michael had used it, testing it out like trying on new shoes. Philip's expression crumpled, years of calculated control giving way to something raw and human. "Thomas, Whatever he meant to say was interrupted by a harsh, rattling cough that shook his frail body. Alarmed, Thomas pressed the call button for the nurse. "Perhaps this was too much," Amelia murmured, drawing Michael back. "No," Philip managed between coughs. "Stay, please." The nurse arrived, administering medication that eased the coughing fit. When she left, Philip seemed even more diminished, as if the confrontation had accelerated his decline. "The board meeting tomorrow," he said weakly. "You're going to vote against the cuts." It wasn't a question, but Thomas answered anyway. "Yes, and I'm going to use every bit of influence I have to save those programs, including the pediatric asthma initiative that treated my son yesterday." Philip closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked directly at Amelia. "I thought I was protecting him," he said, his voice barely audible. "Protecting the legacy. I was wrong." The admission, as close to an apology as Philip Harrington had likely ever offered, left Amelia speechless. "Michael needs to rest," Thomas said after a moment of heavy silence. "We should go." As they turned to leave, Philip called out, "Thomas, the safe in my study. The combination is your mother's birthday. There's a letter, and other things you should see." In the car, Michael fell asleep almost immediately, the emotional and physical toll of the day catching up with him. Amelia sat in the back seat beside him, gently stroking his hair. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I don't know," she admitted. "Today has been surreal. Michael calling you Dad, your father actually showing remorse. It's like everything I thought I knew is shifting." "For me too," Thomas said softly. But some things haven't changed. How I feel about you, for instance. Before Amelia could respond, Thomas's phone rang. Dr. Williams calling with Michael's test results. Thomas pulled the car to the side of the road, his heart hammering as he answered the call on speaker so Amelia could hear. Mr. Harrington, Ms. Bennett, Dr. Williams began, her professional tone giving nothing away. I have Michael's preliminary results. Amelia reached forward from the back seat, gripping Thomas's shoulder. Her knuckles were white, her breathing shallow. The bone marrow aspiration shows no evidence of leukemia. A sob escaped Amelia's lips. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, dizzy with relief. What we're seeing, Dr. Williams continued, is consistent with a rare inflammatory condition that can mimic asthma symptoms but causes more systemic inflammation. It's called Churg-Strauss syndrome, and while it's serious, it's treatable with the right medication regimen. Is it curable? Thomas asked, medical knowledge failing him in his emotional state. It's not curable, but very manageable, the doctor explained. With proper treatment, most patients achieve remission and lead normal lives. The fact that we've caught it relatively early in Michael's case is extremely positive. After discussing follow-up appointments and treatment plans, Thomas ended the call. He turned to find Amelia crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Hey, he said gently, reaching back to wipe a tear from her cheek. This is good news. He's going to be okay. I know, she whispered. I've just been so scared for so long, managing his health alone, never knowing if I was making the right decisions or if I could afford the right care. You're not alone anymore, Thomas promised. Whatever happens next between us, I'm here for Michael, for both of you. In the quiet sanctuary of the car, with their sleeping son between them, something shifted, a new understanding, a tentative bridge across the years they'd lost. Later that evening, after settling Michael in his bed with promises of ice cream tomorrow, Thomas and Amelia sat at her small kitchen table. Between them lay the contents of Philip Harrington's safe, documents Thomas had retrieved while Amelia put Michael to bed. He kept everything, Thomas said, disbelief coloring his voice as he spread out the papers. Your original letter telling me about the pregnancy, birth announcements he must have tracked down, even school records. Amelia picked up a faded envelope, her handwriting on the front addressed to Thomas 15 years ago. He never intended to give you this, did he? Even now it's just another power play, making sure you know he held all the cards until the very end. Maybe, Thomas conceded. Or maybe it's the closest thing to atonement he knows how to offer. Among the documents was a sealed envelope marked with Thomas's name in his father's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter and a set of legal documents. He's amended his will, Thomas said after scanning the papers. He's created a trust for Michael, and he's restructured his shares in the company to give me controlling interest, bypassing the board. Why would he do that now? According to this letter, to ensure I can protect the charitable programs without board interference. Thomas looked up, bewildered. In one afternoon, my father seems to have completely reversed every position he's held for 40 years. People face their legacies differently when the end is near, Amelia said softly. Sometimes it takes losing everything to recognize what truly matters. Thomas set down the papers, reaching for her hand across the table. I don't want to lose any more time, Amelia. These past 24 hours have shown me what's important, not the company, not my father's approval, you and Michael. The family I didn't know I had. Thomas, she hesitated. We can't just pick up where we left off 15 years ago. We're different people now. I know, he acknowledged, but maybe we can start over, get to know who we are now. Let me be a father to Michael, and maybe in time. He trailed off, leaving the possibility hanging between them. Before Amelia could respond, Thomas's phone rang again, the hospice center. Philip Harrington had slipped into a coma. The end was likely within hours. At the hospice, Michael remained asleep in a waiting room under the watchful eye of a kind nurse, while Thomas and Amelia sat at Philip's bedside. The machines that had kept such diligent track of his vital signs now recorded their steady decline. I always thought I'd feel relieved when this moment came, Thomas confessed quietly, free of his expectations, his manipulation. Instead, I just feel sad for all the years we wasted in conflict. Amelia squeezed his hand. Tell him what you need to say. Even in a coma, hearing is often the last sense to go. Thomas leaned forward, his voice low but clear. I forgive you, Dad, for everything. And I'll make sure Michael knows about you, the good parts. How you built a healthcare system that saved thousands of lives, how you loved Mom, how you wanted the best for me, even if your methods were wrong." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I'll take care of the company your way and my way, profitable but compassionate, a legacy we can both be proud of." At 3:47 a.m., Philip Harrington took his last breath, his hand held by the son he had both controlled and cherished. 1 month later, Michael Bennett Harrington, newly christened with his father's surname, burst through the front door of Riverstone Café, his dinosaur backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Dad, they said yes," he exclaimed, rushing toward Thomas, who was waiting at their usual corner table. "Ms. Johnson said my poster about dinosaurs with Churg-Strauss syndrome was the most creative in the class." Thomas laughed, lifting his son into a hug. "That's because no one else would think to combine medical conditions with prehistoric creatures. You're one of a kind, buddy." "Where's Mum?" Michael asked, settling into his chair and reaching for the hot chocolate Thomas had ordered for him. "Meeting with the contractor. The renovations on the new house should be done next week." The past month had brought whirlwind changes. The board meeting Thomas had been dreading turned into a triumphant announcement of expanded charitable programs funded by a new endowment created from Philip Harrington's personal fortune. Michael's condition was responding well to treatment, his energy returning in full force, and Thomas and Amelia were cautiously rebuilding their relationship, taking time to rediscover each other while co-parenting their son. "Is Mom still worried about moving in?" Michael asked, his perception startling Thomas once again. "What makes you think that?" Michael rolled his eyes in a perfect imitation of his mother. "She keeps saying things like, 'It's too much too soon, and we need to be sure.' So adults always think kids don't understand stuff." Thomas smiled. "Your mom is just being careful. We lost a lot of years together, and she wants to make sure we're moving forward for the right reasons." "Because you love each other," Michael stated simply. "That's obvious." Before Thomas could respond, the cafe door opened again and Amelia walked in. She looked different than she had that rainy morning a month ago. More rested, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a designer dress Thomas had insisted on buying her for her new position as Director of Patient Advocacy at Harrington Health Systems. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth beside Michael. "The contractor had a million questions about the sunroom." "Mom, Dad said the house will be ready next week." Michael bounced in his seat. "And I get to paint my room dinosaur green." "Did he now?" Amelia raised an eyebrow at Thomas. "We agreed on a more subtle shade, as I recall." "Negotiations are ongoing," Thomas replied with a grin. As Michael launched into an elaborate description of his classroom triumph, Thomas watched Amelia's face, the way her eyes lit up with pride, how she nodded encouragingly at their son's enthusiastic gestures. He remembered the hospital bracelet that had changed their lives, now preserved in a small frame on his desk. When Michael paused to take a breath, Thomas reached across the table, taking Amelia's hand. "Move in with me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could overthink them. "Both of you, not just for a trial run or because it makes practical sense. Move in because I love you, because I've never stopped loving you. Because 15 years is too long to waste, and I don't want to waste another day." Michael looked between them, his expression hopeful. "Please say yes, Mom. Dad's house has a pool." Amelia laughed, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Well, with an argument that compelling." "Is that a yes?" Thomas pressed, his heart racing. "It's a yes," she confirmed, leaning across the table to kiss him gently. "But I have one condition." "Anything." "I don't want to live in your penthouse, surrounded by your father's taste and his memories. I want our house, the one we're renovating, to be truly ours. A fresh start." "Deal," Thomas agreed immediately. "Though I think Michael's dinosaur green room might clash with your elegant design aesthetic." "I'll learn to live with it," Amelia smiled, wrapping an arm around their son. "We have a lot of time to make it perfect after all." Outside Riverstone Café, rain began to fall again, gentle drops tapping against the windows, where a lost hospital bracelet had once changed the course of 3 lives. Inside, a family once torn apart by secrets and manipulation had found their way back to each other, different, stronger, and finally complete. As Thomas signaled the server for more hot chocolate, he reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. Her single mother's hospital visit, a dropped bracelet, a dying man's confession, each link in a chain that had ultimately led to healing and second chances. In that ordinary cafe, on an ordinary rainy afternoon, Thomas Harrington had found something his father's fortune could never buy. A family, a home, and the love he'd thought was lost forever.